Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Edward, and I'm presenting on investigating form meaning mappings in lexical and grammatical categories in sign languages. I'm from the University of Brighton, UK. So by way of introduction, sign languages are natural languages used by deaf communities around the world. And the study of it, that the scientific study of it began in 1960, pioneered by the work of William Stokey. And since then, many sign languages of the world have been studied, but African Sign Languages remain underrepresented. So in my talk today, I'll focus on form meaning mapping relationship in sign languages, also known as iconicity, and I'll concentrate or bring examples from Ghanaian Sign Language and Adam Roberts Sign Language. So iconicity is the resemblance relationship between form and meaning. That is, the properties of the linguistic form has or have resemblance relationship with the properties of the things in the world. And the visual modality of sign language affords a high degree of iconicity, but iconicity is exhibited in both spoken and signed languages. So in case you want to know an example of iconicity in spoken language, we have onomatopoeia, example is tweet or bang, or idiophones, example is whim whim in a can, which means to walk swiftly. So research on iconicity in sign language have mostly been focused on lexical iconicity, whereby we show form meaning resemblance mapping between lexical items or individual items. So on your screen, you see toothbrush used signed with the index finger, fork with the index finger and the middle finger, spectacles with the thumb and the index finger around the eye, and scissors with the index finger and the middle finger moved back and forth as if cutting an object. However, there are other forms of iconicity that are also revealed in grammatical construction, and we refer to those as iconicity in grammatical construction. An example is this picture on your screen that indicating a boy holding a bicycle, riding and having a basket of fruit in front of him, depicted with an entity classifier where the entity, which is the index finger, refers to the boy himself, and the handling classifier where the hand holds an imaginary bicycle in a simultaneous depiction, and this is iconic. Another example is represented by another signer. We could also see the man holding a fruit and removing bandana from the neck, shown as a signer holding an imaginary fruit and removing an imaginary bandana. These are examples of grammatical iconicity. In my talk today, I discuss iconicity in lexical and grammatical data elicited from signers of Ghanaian and Adam Roberts Sign Languages. I focus on lexical iconicity in relation to what is known as patterned iconicity, and I'll focus on 5 semantic categories. I also discuss iconicity in the grammatical construction with focus on the iconic use of the sign space. So my research questions are, what strategies are used to express lexical iconicity? And here I'm looking at patterns of lexical iconicity among signers for each of the 5 semantic categories, and patterns of iconicity among gesturers produced by non-signers in surrounding urban and rural areas. So I compare what is done by signers to what is done by non-signers to see if gesture and sign used within African communities have anything in common. Then I consider the strategies used to express iconicity in grammatical construction. So my focus is to bring examples from Ghanaian Sign Language and Adam Roberts Sign Language. These sign languages are referred to as urban sign language, that's Ghanaian Sign Language. Adam Roberts is a rural sign language. Ghanaian Sign Language is used by deaf community in Ghana and is emerged from American Sign Language. Adam Roberts Sign Language is used by both hearing and deaf signers in Adam Roberts Village. Ghanaian Sign Language was established after the first school for the deaf in 1957, or developed, sorry, Ghanaian Sign Language developed after the establishment of the first school for the deaf in 1957. Adam Roberts Sign Language emerged in the 18th century. And Ghanaian Sign Language is used by more people as compared by the Adam Roberts Sign Language, which has only 40 deaf signers currently in Adambope. Ghanaian Sign Language is a language of instruction in deaf school. Adambope Sign Language is used just for intra-community communication, and the older signers do not have formal education, but younger signers have been educated. So for participants, I recruited 10 signers who are users of Ghanaian Sign Language, 10 signers users of Adambope Sign Language in Adambope, 10 gesturers who are in Adambope, that is people living in Adambope but do not sign Adambope Sign Language, then 10 gesturers from an urban city, then all signers or all deaf signers were deaf adults between the ages of 24 and 65, and all gesturers had no sign language knowledge and were between the ages of 19 and 60. For the coding of both the lexical and grammatical items, this is how it went. So for the lexical categories, I had signs and gestures for 50 household items. For the grammatical category, signers of both sign languages watched the pair story video. The pair story video is a popular video used for linguistic elicitation, and the videos were coded for the type of predicates used and the simultaneous constructions that were used by signers. I did all the coding with Elan. Elan is a language annotation software. So for lexical iconicity, I hope to present finding on the strategies used by signers to indicate lexical iconicity. And the focus is the use of iconic mapping strategies to express items in the 5 semantic categories. So for the 5, I have handheld tools, 22 items, clothing and accessories, 11 items, furniture and household items, 9 items, appliances, 6 items, and nature, 2 items. Then I compared the signs with gestures produced by non-signers of the surrounding community, as I said earlier, to identify if the iconic strategies used by gesturers, signers are the same as what is used by gesturers. I mentioned patterned iconicity. So patterned iconicity is the recurrent use of one iconic strategy across signs in a particular semantic domain. So different sign languages exhibit different patterns of iconicity within a category. For example, Pardon and her colleagues identified that with the use of handheld tools, signers and gesturers systematically use handling and instrument strategies. So American Sign Language signers, New Zealand Sign Language signers, and Al Sayed Sign Language signers systematically preferred handling and instrument strategies. And there's gesturers of America and gesturers of Israeli Bedouin preferred handling strategies. And as most of us are aware, gestures share 4 meaning resemblance mapping in the same domain just as sign language, because both of them use the hands, the face, the body. So these are the strategies. Handling, the hand holding, representing a human hand and holding or grasping an object. So you could see the signer signing key. Instrument, the hand depicting features of the object and performs action related to it. So toothbrush, the hand moving, the index finger moving back and forth. Entity, where the hand shows the mirror and the hand shows features of the object and does not perform any action. Measure stick, the hand shows the size of the object by delimiting the relevant part by the finger or the arm. So entity and object and measure stick were jointly referred to as entity depiction in my coding. Other strategies include measuring, where the hand indicates the height or the size of the entity, or tracing, where the hand shows virtual shapes in space, and tracing can be talked of in relation to 2D or 3D shapes. And the body strategy, where the hand or the body performs actions related to the object. So body strategy is different from handling strategy. So we have an example of chair, where signers literally move their bodies backwards or up and down. The last strategy I want to talk about in my talk is the presentable action strategy, where signers use gestures that are in a culture to code experiences that are related to the action of the object. So an example is bed, where there's just signers and gesturers systematically use their hands as pillows and put their head on it. So the tracing strategies too will be jointly referred as virtual depiction. So for handheld tools, this is what I identify, that signers and gesturers systematically use handling and instrument strategies, but we see signers preferring more instrument and gesturers preferring more handling. Also, we could see that the rural gesturers, which are the third on the row, use more instruments and handling to almost the same degree. For clothing and accessories, signers and gesturers systematically preferred the entity and handling strategies, but we saw more preference for handling strategies, which is represented by the blue color, as compared to the entity depiction, which is represented by the orange color. We also see that Ghanaian Sign Language signers have very little handling and very little entity. And this is because the signers were also identified to use more forms that were coded as non-iconic. For furniture and household items, both signers and gesturers systematically use virtual depiction, that is tracing strategies. And the rural and the urban gesturers with Adam Robert signers used more body strategies, that is the body reclining, moving backward or forward, as compared to Ghanaian Sign Language signers. For appliances, we identify that signers and gesturers showed preference for handling, instruments, and virtual depiction. You could identify Ghanaian Sign Language signers systematically preferring instrument strategy, which is represented by the orange color, and the Adambope and the gesturers using equal preference for handling, instruments, and virtual depiction. You don't really see a systematic preference for one of the three as compared to Ghanaian Sign Language signers. When it comes to the nature category, three strategies were identified: entity depiction, virtual depiction, and presentable action. Both signers and gesturers systematically use entity depiction, but we identified that the Adamrobe signers and the gesturers show a higher preference for virtual depiction as compared to Ghanaian Sign Language signers. On the other hand, Ghanaian Sign Language signers also show a higher preference for presentable action as compared to the Adamrobe Sign Language signers and the gesturers. Now we move on to iconicity in grammatical construction. So we see that the visual encoding of items in the spatial domain in sign language affords the use of space, the hands, and the body. And there's a high potential for form meaning resemblance mapping. Why? Because the sign use the virtual spatial expression or visual spatial information. There is affordances of the modality to bring about a high degree of similarity between different sign languages in the spatial domain. For example, the system of classifier predicate, that is entity classifiers, handling classifiers, or limb classifiers, and the simultaneity of expression. So for iconicity in grammatical construction, the focus is to identify the strategies signers use to express iconicity in grammatical constructions. And here I focus on the signers, not the signers and the gestures. So entity classifiers. So entity classifiers are hand shapes that are used to depict entity information. So here we see example of signers using entity classifiers to express motion information in both sign languages. So you could see the image on your screen. It's quite little, but it's a zoomed out image of a boy and a girl riding a bicycle. And we see both signers using entity handshakes, that is the index fingers or the index and the middle finger, which is referred to as the two-legged entity classifier, to depict the movement of the boy and the girl riding the bicycle. Now I talk about simultaneous constructions. So simultaneous constructions are defined as representations that are produced in more than one articulatory channel, and whereby each channel bears distinct and independent meaning and stand in some relationship to each other. So an example is the boy riding a bicycle and having a basket of fruits in front of him can be simultaneously represented as using the two-legged entity classifier depicting the boy on the bicycle and the handling classifier depicting the handling of the handlebars of the bicycle. Another signer chooses to use the lexical sign go and the handling of the handling bars of the bicycle. So you could see two entities or two events or two actions or two things being depicted at the same time. So simultaneous constructions are used by signers to express motion. So both signers of Ghanaian Sign Language and the Berber Sign Language use entity classifiers, handling classifiers, limb classifiers concurrently to express the motion of events or even lexical items as expressed in the lexical sign go. So the examples on your screen show two events or one event being expressed simultaneously or two referents being expressed simultaneously. So simultaneous constructions are also used to depict the action of events. So you could see the boy eating pear and playing tennis being expressed simultaneously using entity classifiers and handling classifiers, or even two handling classifiers as expressed by the Ghanaian Sign Language signer, and one entity classifier where the entity refers to either the tennis or the boy eating the pear, or handling another entity referring to the tennis itself, and the handling classifier referring to the handling of the pear. In summary, we've identified that both signers and gesturers exhibit systematic preference for iconic representation of household items using an action-based sign which depicts how the object is handled or features of the object. We also identified that signers and gesturers use instrument or handling strategy for both handheld or manipulable objects. So you could see that handheld tools, clothing, accessories, and appliances were mainly handling or instruments or both. And signers and gesturers preferring tracing strategy and even entity depiction for non-manipulable objects like furniture and nature. The high proportion of use of instrument strategy for handheld tools by gesturers in the rural community of Adambobe may be the result of the language contact with Adambobe Sign Language, although the gesturers showed or indicated that they do not sign Adambobe Sign Language. Since they live in the same community, there is some form of contact. An example is the fact that all rural gesturers responded with instrument strategy for broom, whereas urban gesturers responded with handling strategy. When we move on to the iconicity in grammatical construction, we identify that signers use similar iconic strategies to express action and motion. That is, both sign languages use classified predicates for motion and action. And we also identify simultaneous constructions of different types used by both signers, and the simultaneous constructions of different types either express one event or two events, had one reference or even two reference. So one reference is boy eating pear and playing tennis at the same time, and two reference is the man was dragging the goats. So we see the man himself and the goats as well. So form meaning resemblance relationship between the linguistic form of the sign and the meaning associated to the sign motivates similarities between signers and gesturers. And as we've already indicated, gestures share iconic affordances of visual spatial modality. We've also identified the cross-linguistic similarity in concept selection for form meaning mappings between the signers and the gestures among the lexical items. We've seen that there are similarities and differences between sign languages in the spatial domain. We've seen also that the modality bring a high degree of similarities. Similar strategies were used by signers using the same classifier predicates and also simultaneity of expression. On the other hand, various factors can also contribute to the differences in the spatial domain. So contact with surrounding spoken language can cause differences. Age of the sign language can bring about differences, and the makeup of the signing community can bring about differences. Also, specific language structures can bring about differences. In conclusion, the visual spatial affordances of the visual modality gives rise to a high degree of similarity in the depiction of lexical items and iconicity in the grammatical domain. We need cross-linguistic investigation as it reveals the differences between sign languages in this domain. On the other hand, language contact between different sign languages may influence the choice of strategies used to depict lexical and grammatical information. We also identify, looking at the gestures produced by non-signers, that the gestural substrate of African languages may contribute to similarities among different sign languages. And form meaning resemblance mapping, which is iconicity in sign languages, are not just pictures in the air, but a collaborative relationship between the linguistic form of the sign and the meaning. In other words, you could not identify the meaning of an iconic sign by just looking at it, but you need to also know the sign and what it actually refers to in the real world, as different iconic signs could refer to similar items. Thank you.